everybody to this webinar. We're really lucky to have Eve and Nicole here to give us this presentation. The title is Tools for Addressing Intimate Partner Violence for Home Visitors. So we have two presenters here today with us. The first is Eve Sheedy, and she is the Executive Director of the Los Angeles County Domestic Violence Council. In this role, Eve leads the county's domestic violence coalition comprised of survivors, community-based organizations, and public health agencies whose work touches the lives of those impacted by intimate partner violence. In addition to overseeing the coalition, Ms. Sheedy runs the Office of the Domestic Violence Council, which works to address domestic violence as a public health issue, provide support for those providing domestic violence-related services, and address domestic violence issues within the county and throughout the community in Los Angeles. The Domestic Violence Council is housed in the Health Promotion Bureau of the Department of Public Health. Prior to this position, Ms. Sheedy was the Director of Domestic Violence Policy at the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office and Chair of the City of Los Angeles Domestic Violence Alliance. Ms. Sheedy's work has focused on connecting domestic violence to related issues, including gang violence, gun violence, employment, and homelessness. Ms. Sheedy is a licensed California attorney and has practiced criminal defense and prosecution, civil litigation, First Amendment and privacy, and civil appeals. Ms. Sheedy obtained her law degree from Boston University School of Law and her undergraduate degree from Haverford College as a member of the first group of matriculating women. So we're so lucky to have Eve here, and we're so thankful that you're willing to provide this information for us, Eve. We also have a second speaker with us today, who is Nicole Paris, and Nicole is a health program analyst for the Office of Women's Health within the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, where she serves as the lead on gender-based violence prevention, suicide prevention, trauma-informed service delivery and systems, and overall population health and wellness initiatives. Before coming to the Office of Women's Health, Nicole worked for 12 years as a research analyst with the Injury and Violence Prevention Program, also at DPH. There she served as the lead on an all gender-based violence, suicide prevention, mental health, trauma-informed care, and family violence-related projects, studies, and data surveillance activities. Nicole received her BA and her MPH from UCLA and is also a licensed marriage and family therapist. So because we're all muted, we will have a very silent round of applause and welcome for both Eve and Nicole. We thank you guys for being here, and we're very excited to have you talk about this issue with us. So thank you very much, and I will let you take it away.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
Correct.
We're good?
We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say how really glad I am to be here. We are connected, whether or not we've been formally connected. You are seeing some of the same people that I am dealing with, and you are going to people's homes, either now remotely or actually, and it's really some of the most critical partnerships we have with domestic violence. So I hope this is the beginning of a long relationship between all of us. You are all welcome. The DV Council is the coalition, and we also, every day we put out a digested email of domestic violence resources and so forth. I offer you all to join that. We have meetings, we have different committees and so forth. To the degree that your time permits, I would love to have you participate in that, and you can offer those same, give those same offers to the people who you're providing services for. So I'm really happy to be here. As you heard, I'm a lawyer by training, but I'm now in public health. Good timing on my part. And so we're going to talk, Nicole and I are going to talk a little bit about what's going on. It's a little bit COVID-19 focused, but it's also broader as well. So if you can click. Can you click?
Did you see it change?
No.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, 1 second. You can't see the slides change, Eve?
I cannot. Is it on the next slide?
It is on the next slide, but if you can't see it, then
Okay.
nobody can. So one second. I'm so sorry, everybody. Please bear with me for a moment here. See if this works. Oh, okay.
Now
How about now? Can you see it now? Okay.
Yep.
Great.
Okay. So, one of the first things that happens is people ask, why don't survivors just leave the relationship? And from the beginning, to some degree, that's the responsibility of the DV field, who I think it has focused on the has focused on the conduct of survivors instead of so much on the conduct of people who are abusive from the beginning, and so that got sort of turned around. I do want to say, and I do want to acknowledge that when you're working with people who are survivors of domestic violence, it can be frustrating. You can offer someone resources and so forth that you may think they're not taking advantage of, and they actually may be when you're not there, but it may take a long time. And some of the reasons, I know you've already had sort of basic DV training and you may know this, but the reason why I put the seesaw there is it's really a balance, and there's a lot that goes on. A lot of people during this pandemic have not reached out or did not reach out initially for services because they didn't know if services were being provided by DV agencies, which they are, and they thought that if they had to go somewhere that it wasn't going to be safe, that they weren't having the right practices and so forth. Additionally, pulling yourself and your family up in the midst of a pandemic and leaving your home can be terrifying. And so there are a lot of issues. And also, it's important to understand that even bad relationships that may include abuse in any form, whether that be violence or other forms of abuse, are not bad all the time. These are people who are generally in intimate partner relationships and came together at some point because there was a connection. So in these times where everybody's very, very frightened of what's going to happen, what their health is going to be, what the health of their children's going to be, what the health of their family and friends, that, it helps to sometimes just to, sort of stay where you are, the devil so to speak. So I think there are a lot of reasons why people may not be willing to leave at this moment. And I think what's most important is that we really respect that we don't talk about services being available to people based on their willingness to leave. Everyone's entitled to support and services. And when they're ready to do what they want to do, and they may never be ready, there are still ways that we can help support people and help them to be safe. Okay, if you can click. So importantly, a lot of people do not identify as a victim, particularly the people you're speaking with, because if someone says they're a DV victim, particularly if talking to someone who's a mandatory reporter, that can sometimes be viewed by DCFS or other agencies as being not protecting your child, where actually the DV Council is really working on this actively and trying to address that issue for non-offending parents who aren't doing anything else. But it is important to know that there's hesitation. Additionally, people who've grown up in violent households or people who've grown up around violence really may not see what's going on as something that's different. And people don't really want to identify as a victim. A victim's a word that came initially from a law enforcement perspective, and people have a lot of sides to themselves and a lot of dimensions to themselves, and they may not define that way. It may be someone, is a painter, or somebody is a really good cook or something like that, and they don't really want to define themselves as a DV victim. So as I said before, it is really important to support the person where they're at. So if someone is not, if someone is seeking services or support, or you talk to someone and you feel like they may need support, you can suggest that they call a hotline. So a hotline is 24/7 and it's completely confidential. They don't need to tell their name. They don't need to say any identifying information. So it's very safe, and it may happen there if there's a moment where someone has the ability to talk. So some of the reasons why someone might want to call a hotline are listed on the left. I'm not going to read them to you, but it's also important to know that someone who wants to help someone can call a hotline. So if you want to talk to someone and you don't know the words to use, or somebody's acting in a way that doesn't make sense to you, you can call a hotline too. So can family and friends and so forth, all to get the support that you may need in order to work more effectively with people who are survivors or actively in relationships that include abuse. Okay, so can you click? So I'm dividing for sake of ease into sort of 3 kinds of services and what's going on as far as these services go today. So if you click, we're going to start with shelter-based agencies. So as you may or may not know, shelter-based agencies provide housing, right? But they also provide they're actually called the 13 core services, which are not all listed here, but the primary ones are listed here. So all of the shelter-based agencies also have what are called drop-in centers, which are now obviously being operated remotely, but they operate sort of the same kind of services that a non-shelter-based agency would do. They run a hotline, they have counseling, either on-site legal services or access to legal services, and so forth. So they're very, very complete agencies. In Los Angeles, a lot of places that have emergency shelter also have a transitional shelter. So emergency shelter is generally sort of for 30 days, and then you can move to transitional. So COVID has changed everything, right? So what happened was when the pandemic hit, the people who were in emergency shelter, those agents, they got to stay. So the whole system where people generally move out and go on to a different kind of housing changed. So the people now, there may have been people who were in emergency shelter at that moment for 60 days. Now it's been another 2 months or more. So they're still there. The benefit of that for the field has been, there have been very few, if any, cases of COVID within shelters, but it also has prevented this sort of normal movement through. There is off-site safe housing pretty much for anyone who wants it, which I'll explain in more detail later. But all of these services that are listed are also now presently available remotely. So if someone calls a hotline and they need other services, they will be able to get those as well. Okay, so you can click. Oh, I have that. I might be able to do this. Okay, so the non-shelter-based agencies, some of them have hotlines, not all of them. And they provide many of the same services as are listed on the prior slide. The difference is that some of them are very particularly focused. Like, for example, there's an agency called Free From, which is really focused on financial empowerment. So there are services for domestic violence survivors that are non-shelter based, which may be specific. But generally speaking, Peace Over Violence gave, I think, the DV 101 training. They are really a full service agency, although they don't themselves run a shelter. And there are some other agencies throughout Los Angeles. The bottom line is that if you connect to any DV agency, we are a pretty cohesive group here. So even if somebody has called the wrong place, meaning they don't have the services for that person, they're likely to be able to access other services. They'll help them access other services. And again, it's 24/7 and it's confidential. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the other option is people can call or text 911. I didn't know people actually could text 911. It's something I've learned during the pandemic. It's only actually for English speakers, though. The other thing is we do not have here in Los Angeles any agencies that people can text, except for, I think, Break the Cycle, which is for younger people. The national hotline does have, and that's on my last slide, does have not only a text option, but it also has a chat option. So if people go online, they have a 24-hour chat option. But locally, we do not have that. So it makes it hard for some people. You know, one of the things that happens in abusive relationships is that the phone becomes sort of the property of the abuser. So it wouldn't, in that instance, whether someone texted or called may not make a difference. But there are, you can text 911 if you are English speaking, and they will respond by text, which you may have known, but as I said, I didn't know. One of the changes under COVID is that emergency protective orders, which are issued by police officers when they respond to the scene, were usually good for 5 to 7 days. Under COVID, they're good for up to 30 days. There's a bit of a problem with judges issuing them for that long, but there is a concerted effort at this point by law enforcement based on conversations we've had to try to extend the time. It is taking people, the theory is you get this temporary order while you can go to court to get a longer order, but the issue is that getting that domestic violence restraining order is now taking longer. So people need the emergency protective orders for longer. Police can also get gun violence restraining orders, which I'm not going to go into detail about, but it's a means by which, particularly if someone is suicidal, it's a means by which police can collect firearms if someone is a danger to themselves or others by use of a firearm. Police can get those issues as well. If someone calls law enforcement, the normal course is it will subject, them to a criminal case being filed, which is some reason why people don't like to call law enforcement, amongst other reasons. But that's sort of the pathway that goes down. For LAPD, they have what's called DART, which is a domestic abuse response team, which means that when they respond to at least some of their domestic violence cases, that they will connect people with a domestic violence advocate either on the scene or immediately thereafter. So it's a way to connect someone to services. The last 3 points there are not criminal issues, but they are things that people can help with at legal service providers. So all the domestic violence legal service providers are also open during COVID. There is a comprehensive list of those on the DV Council website, and they all have, in addition to having a list of what's there, they explain how to reach them, what hours they're open, and so forth. The courts are open for emergency services, which includes domestic violence restraining orders. So it is possible to get those now. Whether or not someone really wants to do that at this moment is a slightly different question, but it is an option for people should they want to. Additionally, if people have questions about, there's been a lot of language that's been thrown around eviction moratoriums and so forth. If people have questions about how that impacts them and whether or not there are a number of laws which protect domestic violence survivors in terms of rent and so forth. And so, that's my husband's phone. So, okay, and so there are landlord, if they need landlord-tenant or they need financial abuse consultation, all of that is available. And sometimes the best thing you can do is really just say to someone, here's a way you can get to that. And again, if someone doesn't want to call the police, if it's not a matter of imminent harm or they have other reasons, if they call a hotline, they'll be able to connect to any of these kind of services. Okay, you can click. So I just want to go very quickly. So I did the shelter-based housing. So that's sort of the normal the usual housing. So Project Safe Haven is something that's unique to COVID. So the mayor's office got private funding to provide hotel accommodations for up to 900 rooms until June 19th. And importantly, within that housing, and I believe Martha sent out this morning to all of you a list of shelter-based agencies that can access that. It not only includes safe housing, but it also includes a stipend for food, transportation there, as well as case management from a DV agency. So they have now housed approximately 400 people. It can be people with children, families, so forth, male, female, whoever, but you cannot bring pets. That's the issue. You cannot bring your pets. So that is available, and like I said, right now, it's until that housing exists till June 19th. They are working on either possibly extending that depending on funding, and they're also working with LASA. So it's a big decision. I just want to underscore this. The question isn't whether or not someone leaves. The question is, how can we support someone best for what their needs are now and what they can deal with? And we're not trying to get to a point where we're pushing people to leave. But if they feel they have to leave for their own safety or the safety of their children, or DCFS is making them do that, know that for really the first time in decades, there is housing, safe housing available for people, and they can access that housing through the hotline numbers that were passed out. It's through a number of agencies, and they will provide case management. If you don't know the right agency and you get to a different agency that's not one of those specific ones, they will refer you. Again, everybody's sort of together on this. Project Room Key is run by LASA, and that is for people who are either over 65 or they're in a compromised condition. So it's not for people who have COVID, but people who may be at risk of contracting it. And those are also in hotels. The issue is DV survivors cannot be entered without waiving their rights into what's called the HMIS system, because it's not secure for DV survivors. LASA has created an alternate portal which also can be accessed by DV agencies and or their local CES DV person who they know how to get in touch with. I have a list of those people as well. I can forward that to Martha after this call. That's singles only. And again, it's only 65 or older or people who have some other compromise. That does not include the same level of case management and so forth, but it is housing. Then it is, depending on where you're placed, there may be some form of case management for survivors. Okay, you can click. So these are the hotlines so now you have this twice I sent it out this morning, and this includes also the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking is for trafficking victims, obviously, but any of these agencies listed can house someone in safe housing. But if you tell someone to call a hotline, my suggestion is you just tell them to call the hotline and to talk to someone about what the options are. I don't think we really want to tell people you should call to get housing, because we really want the people who answer the hotline are trained. And so they're going to have a conversation and talk about the ramifications of the decisions that people make and whether or not it's safe. When you leave a relationship, the lethality danger goes way up. So we don't want to encourage anyone to leave unless they really have thought about the safety implications and the long-term implications. That's why I keep on sort of pushing people to hotline. Okay, you can click.
Eve, we also do have a question in the chat for you.
Sure.
It says, how can a victim or survivor of domestic violence or intimate partner violence obtain financial, education, or abuse assistance?
Okay, so specifically, if you want financial education information, there's an agency that's called Free From, FREEFROM, and they, although they don't provide direct service, they can connect you with a shelter-based organization that has the ability to do that. Genesee Center has a financial empowerment section, and one of the things that Free From has developed is a number of online tools that are very easy to use that help people sort of negotiate through some of those issues, credit issues, and so forth. I think that was, the question was focused on financial resources, right?
Thank you.
We did a webinar for the LA County Department of Consumer and Business Affairs, I think. So they may have posted information on their website as well, specifically about that. If someone has tech issues, there's an agency called ENDTAB, ENDTAB, and there's a thing called Safety Net. Both of those can help people sort of negotiate now that everybody's sort of confined to tech to communicate, that can help them feel safe that way. So the DV Council, we run a hotline. The hotline is not answered by a human being. It's answered by recording that is played in multiple languages, I think all the threshold languages. And someone enters a zip code, and then they're connected to a live person at a DV agency who will answer the phone. So it's a two-step process, but it does get you to a human being. Our website has a ton of resources right now and forever, and you can reach that way, or you can Google LA County DV Council. And we have this resource booklet which we developed called Reaching Out, and it's available for download on our website, also in multiple languages. And then I can get you hard copies once I can go back to the office. We have English and Spanish, and we're actually getting under the wire, so we're also printing in multiple languages. And one of the important things in that booklet is we have resources for the LGBTQ community, and we also we speak to people who they themselves may be becoming violent, to try to reach out to those people without judgment, but just to try to see if we can support people so they don't become violent. And I've also included, like I said, the National DV Hotline. They have TTY number, they have a website. On the website there's chat, and they also have a text option. So again, I guess the message is, don't forget, these resources are available for everyone. It's not always easy to know how to reach someone, and it's also not easy, sometimes it's just, no matter how much experience you have, it can be difficult or frustrating. So feel free, if you need help, or if you want to talk to someone, call a hotline. So click, and then I put on a timer for myself. So this is my little dog who's helping me through this because he's so cute. And that's my contact information. And I want you to know, I mean this really. I'm here to help you. I want you to feel supported. I don't want you to feel alone if you're dealing with someone who's dealing with domestic violence. We are here, my job, and I want to help you do your job. You can send me an email. That's my cell number because we're all sort of on cell, but I am here to help you. Please, please, please feel free to reach out, whether it be during COVID or after. Just know, if you're dealing with domestic violence, we really want to help you feel comfortable, and we so appreciate your work, and we really are a team, and we really want to be there for you. And what I can do is, I saw that I can put in it once Nicole starts, I'm done, but once Nicole starts talking, I'll type that information into the chat box. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eve. Thank you. That would be great if you'll put that in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Eve.
Right.
If you could click to the next slide. So given all of the resources and information that Eve has just provided, how can we best show up for clients experiencing intimate partner violence And more specifically, given our immediate situation, how do we support our clients and ourselves during COVID-19 and moving forward? Next slide, please. The following steps can be helpful to remember, really starting with yourselves. And what is your self-care? How are you working to avoid burnout, vicarious trauma? And how are you maintaining your own well-being and health? Being self-aware, working with issues of violence and abuse can be extremely emotionally and physically difficult. It's essential to explore and get to know our own feelings, ideas, and beliefs around domestic violence and how they might be influencing our current views, practices, and interactions with clients. We really want to be grounded in our role of what our role is in these situations. As Eve mentioned, we're really there to connect people to resources. We're giving them the space to bring up issues they might be having, to voice concerns. And then we're looking to the hotlines or the DV advocates to get those connections and resources in the hands of people who need them. And it can be really difficult to keep our own expectations in check. Again, we're here to connect clients to resources, not to fix everything, not to know everything or to be everything. And just to say too that this can be really challenging, especially when you're seeing clients and families in their home, because you're becoming part of their lives and their spaces. But it's really essential to remember and hold this boundary for you and also for your client's best interest. Just to remember, you're one member of a larger team of supports that are out there. And no matter how difficult things are, clients are really resilient, resourceful, and have fought hard to survive up until this point. So to have faith in those internal resiliency skills they have as well. Also, it's really important that we use trauma-informed practices and that we always prioritize safety. As Eve said, we really are there to meet the client where they're at. However, if there is imminent danger, then we're required as mandated reporters to take action that fits that level of danger. Again, our role is to assist, support, and guide the client, remembering to work from the points of what does your client need right now? Can we, our program or agency, provide that? If not, do we know someone who can? And what will it take to get the client connected to the support they're requesting in this moment? Again, we really want to avoid telling clients what to do. Besides really shutting down conversations and, being shameful and judgmental and dismissive, it alienates clients from us and it repeats the cycle of power and control that's been used over them. Next slide, please. So much like there are strategic orders or steps you must take in successfully solving a complicated math equation, when it comes to supporting others, we always need to begin with ourselves. Learn to drink as you pour so the spiritual heart cannot run dry and you always have love to give. This is a beautiful reminder of the process of caring for ourselves as we care for others. Providers, just like parents, need to take care of themselves first. Research has documented several simple things that we can do every day to help regulate our stress response system and to buffer the negative impacts of stress to keep us healthy. We really need to be mindful of incorporating these practices at the system level, meaning within our agencies, and also with our own individual self-care practices. The good news about all this is that all of these tools we're using for ourselves are tools that we can also share with our clients and their families to help them all stay well. Next slide, please. Also, just to take a moment to really, reiterate that intimate partner violence is something that's really difficult to talk about. Domestic violence is so widespread that all of us, at one point or another, have experienced or witnessed violence and abuse, either in our own relationships, among our family members, friends, or coworkers. And for some of us, this violence might still be happening. However, regardless of how widespread, these issues are still very difficult to talk about. Violence and abuse can carry a lot of stigma, shame, and self-blame. Additionally, for many, previous experiences or attempts to disclose or share their experiences may have been received negatively in the past, either met with disbelief, they were dismissed, or they reinforced these feelings of shame, guilt, and the idea that it was our own fault. So again, domestic violence is a cycle of power and control built on fear, coercion, intimidation, isolation, making this sensitive information even more difficult to share with strangers. Next slide, please. So I talked about self-awareness, and part of that is being aware of our own beliefs around domestic violence. So who do you think of when you think of a victim of domestic violence? What do you see when you think of someone who abuses or causes harm to others? And what does it feel like to hear or to ask somebody to discuss issues of violence in their relationship? It can feel too intrusive, too personal. Is it uncomfortable or overwhelming? And to really give some thought as to how your own experiences, your exposures or thoughts about domestic violence, how those might be influencing your responses to clients, either directly or indirectly in more subtle ways. Next slide, please. So as Eve mentioned, this is, a general webinar for tools to address intimate partner violence, but we can't go forward without mentioning the major caveats that have come along with the pandemic. So some additional things to consider during COVID-19 is that this pandemic has introduced many factors that make taking care of our overall mental health and well-being challenging, not just for us, but also for our clients and families. The sudden onset presented an immediate threat, but it's also turned into a prolonged crisis. The continued uncertainty and lack of information and the constantly evolving and changing facts can be very anxiety-provoking. There's been a loss of regular routines. All of our worlds are colliding, and that we're forced to suddenly work, teach, recreate, and go about all our daily living, all within the shared space, which again is making it more dangerous for some. A lot of our coping skills, such as socializing with others, physical activity, those have been taken away for the moment. And there's no official end date yet. We are slowly starting to open up, but the projections keep changing, and the uncertainty, again, is an extreme contributor to stress, worry, and anxiety for many of us. Yet at the same time, there's an expectation and also a need to keep moving forward. But what does this look like? And none of us know, because none of us have navigated this. We're learning as we go. Next slide, please. One more thing before this one is around COVID-19, just to remind your clients that, and yourself, that their concerns are normal. The fears, worry, anger, grief, and anxiety are valid. None of us have experienced anything like this before, and that things are not normal for our communities and families. And they've also drastically changed for ourselves. So just to remember, it's not service delivery as usual, but we're still out there providing the services that our clients need. So using trauma-informed care, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Agency, known as SAMHSA, the main pillars of trauma-informed care include 4 things: a response that integrates what we know about trauma into all policies, procedures, and practices, recognizing how widespread trauma is and that there are pathways to healing and recovery, recognizing that what the potential impacts of trauma on individuals, families, communities, and staff might be, what they look like, how they manifest, and how they can show up within our agencies and systems, and to actively resist re-traumatizing people. Next slide, please. So this first pillar, what does a trauma-informed response look like? It's really about having an open dialogue. So as Eve had talked about, not telling somebody to call a hotline for shelter information, but really inviting people to participate in a dialogue. It's sharing power, it's providing transparency. So like as Eve also mentioned, the hotline operators will go through potential consequences of seeking out different services. And it's really meeting clients where they're at. So if they come in saying they need some support, we're not jumping or rushing trying to get them into a shelter. It's also having systems that address trauma amongst clients and also staff, and incorporate we care policies to prevent burnout and vicarious trauma among employees. And safety is always the number one goal. Next slide, please. So how do we ask questions through a trauma-informed lens? This is a way of navigating the conversation that, again, doesn't require disclosure to get people connected to resources and support. Again, if someone chooses to disclose, we want to listen and avoid interrupting. We want to show compassion and validate their experience, and we want to let them tell the story at their own pace. We don't want to pry or ask for more details. We don't want to try to share our own or a friend's experience. We don't want to express opinions, judgments, or personal beliefs. And we're not there to judge whether this is true or not. This is what the survivor's story is, and this is their experience. And another thing that we might not always be aware of is why questions. We want to stay away from asking why, because this has a tendency to make people feel like they have to defend what they're saying, and they can get defensive and shut down. And it can also, it might not be where you're coming from, but it can also communicate in some ways that we either don't believe or we're skeptical of what they're telling us. Next slide, please. The second pillar means that we realize how common and widespread intimate partner violence is. As we communicate, and how do we communicate that fact and our own understanding of how widespread intimate partner violence is to the clients we're working with? So again, this is really normalizing this conversation around violence and abuse and trying to destigmatize and take some of the shame and the self-blame out of it. So what we're really communicating is domestic violence is common and widespread, but we also know that it's preventable and that the cycles of violence can be broken. We know that survivors and people who cause harm can recover and heal. We want to shift the perspective from why do you stay to what's keeping you from leaving, or how can we help you stay in your relationship safely? If it is time to leave, what can we help you with now? And we want to move away from focusing solely on the violence and abuse and move towards looking at the whole person in their situation. So again, what are the immediate needs? And it might not be related to the violence and abuse. Next slide, please. The third pillar recognizes the traumatic impacts of intimate partner violence to all parts of an individual and families. So there's psychological, emotional, spiritual, and physical aspects. We're really trying to normalize and validate these reactions to abnormal experiences and situations. So again, what might look like quote unquote negative coping skills to us or harmful decision making are really people just trying to do the best they can in abnormal experiences and situations. Again, trying to really focus on what are people's strengths, their resiliency, what are those internal resources they have that have been supporting them and allowing them to get through this situation so far. We're really looking to empower. And as Eve mentioned, a lot of people, as soon as you mention the word victim, that turns them off and shuts them down. So there is a discussion, right, of who wants to be called a survivor versus who wants to be called a victim. And I would say that there's no straight cut answer to that. What you really want to do is you want to follow the language that the client's using. So one of the best trauma-informed practices you can use is really listening to what they're saying and not parroting word for word back to them, but using the same language that they're using so that you're understanding and you're not necessarily labeling something for them. So really listening to the feelings and thoughts without trying to fix them or to rescue the person. Next slide, please. So again, because trauma is so widespread, we are working in agencies and systems and fields where each of us bring our own unique history, experiences, and perspectives that directly and indirectly impact our work. So additionally, systems themselves have historically implemented very top-down approaches of power and control over staff and clients, and the trauma-informed practices really require a cultural shift at the systems level change as well, not just the way we engage individual clients. We want to be trauma-informed in all ways to actively avoid re-traumatizing all parties. So this is really trying to show that, yes, we want to practice trauma-informed service delivery, but we really need to be doing it throughout our entire system. Next slide, please. So violence, abuse, and trauma often go hand in hand with physical, mental, and behavioral health experiences. However, we need to be aware that some clients will not make that connection between the trauma experience and the pattern of behavior or health conditions. So say if someone's got a substance use problem or an avoidant behavior, we want to recognize that and kind of make connections without labeling them. So for instance, you know, how is your relationship? How is your health? And then once we kind of gain that information, okay, might there be something going on in the relationship? Not coming out and accusing someone of, well, do you drink because your relationship's violent? But just providing education about, you know, relationships. There's a lot known about how they can affect our health. How are you feeling in your relationship? You know, how's it been going? And to really validate that these are difficult conversations to have. But we really want to provide that education on there are connections between the status of our relationships and our physical and mental well-being. Next slide, please. So a big part of using a trauma-informed lens is really keeping our clients and also ourselves grounded. So at the end of an appointment, making sure, you know, if the client got upset, you know, because these are really difficult and emotional conversations to have, are they safe to leave or are they safe to hang up and go back to whatever it was they were doing? Is there a simple thing that you can do about, you know, can we take a couple deep breaths? Can you take a sip of water? Something that employs your senses can be really grounding, meaning it can get you back into your body. And so to be able to do that to lead our clients in that, but also for ourselves. I mean, some of the stories and the information that you will be given can be very distressing and difficult to hear. So how can you make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well? Does that mean debriefing with a colleague or supervisor? You know, do you need to take a mini break in between phone calls? You know, getting up, walking around your space a little bit, washing your hands in warm or cold, you know, cold or warm water. That temperature is really important. Taking a couple sips of water or tea, but something to get yourself back and realigned in your body so that you're present for the next thing that you need to move on to. Next slide, please. I wanted to throw this in. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think it's a good reminder right now because we're seeing during the pandemic that the basic needs of, you know, our physiological needs of food, water, shelter, and rest, our needs of safety, and our needs of belonging, that connection, they're so important, and they're the things that a lot of us are struggling with right now. And for many people now, and also people who experience violence and abuse, Many of them are just trying to meet their basic needs from day to day for themselves and their families. And again, because domestic violence includes that power and control, often the partner's access to basic needs, such as safety, shelter, food, and connection to others, is taken away or manipulated. And what might seem most important to us might not always be the client's top priority. And just to reinforce and remind that during the pandemic, many clients will need increased assistance with meeting their family's basic needs, including navigating food insecurity, general housing needs, and medical services. Next slide, please. And the last pillar of the trauma-informed care is avoiding re-traumatizing people. And so what we really want to do is, again, as mandated reporters, when we are inquiring about intimate partner violence, we want to disclose those limits of confidentiality up front, because you want to make sure that your client is making an informed decision as to what they share with you and whether or not you're going to have to report that. And we also want to be aware that asking about whether they're experiencing violence or abuse, it can put them in danger. As Eve said, if they do decide to leave or make some kind of change, that can be a very at-risk time for people. And you want to make sure that you never use a family or a friend as an interpreter. You never know, again, what that relationship is. And when someone does disclose abuse, we want to condemn the violence and abuse, not the abuser. As Eve mentioned, these relationships aren't all bad. That's why there's so much conflict about what to do, whether to stay or go, and that these people were, they were drawn together for a reason. They have commonalities, they have deep caring for each other. And then the big thing is that you don't need a client to disclose they're experiencing violence or abuse to be helpful and supportive. Really providing trauma-informed approaches, meeting clients where they're at, meeting the needs they come in with, and providing a safe and compassionate place for them to talk, those are all essential. Next slide, please. So I wanted to put a note in here about vicarious trauma, to really be aware and stay vigilant about vicarious trauma and burnout. This quote, "The emotional residue of exposure to someone's trauma stories, witness of pain, fear, and terror that trauma survivors have endured." Again, as I mentioned, this can be so difficult working in this field. And as the quote describes vicarious trauma as this emotional residue, I think that's something to really get a good visual about, is that it can become problematic for the service providers if there isn't a kind of awareness and persistence of how to deal with all of that you're taking in from other people. Next slide, please. So again, it's coming full circle back to you. Really taking care of ourselves is essential to be able to provide and continue providing this work in meaningful, compassionate, and helpful ways to our clients and communities. So really monitoring yourself. You really want to keep track of your levels of burnout and compassion fatigue. Take time for yourself. Really separate yourself. We're holding an environment often for a lot of pain from our clients and a lot of hardship. And so just that reminder that it's not your pain, you're holding it for a little while. But again, how do you not take that with yourself? Is there a ritual at the end of your workday or after you see clients that you find is helpful to kind of separate your professional life from your personal life? Really be honest with yourself if things are building up, seeking out help, and finding ways to kind of kindly check in with yourself and others about your job satisfaction. What do you enjoy doing most? What's most rewarding? What's most stimulating to you? And then what kind of schedule is working best for you? Things can be really upside down right now as well with the pandemic and the nature of emergency services. So just to really take inventory of that and stay on top of it. Next slide, please. And this concept of we care, we talk a lot about self-care, and that's one step in the process, but we cannot do it all alone, and we don't have to. We can really support each other, our coworkers and our staff, through acts of gratitude, appreciation, connection, and encouragement. And this is important all of the time, but especially now during the pandemic when many of us are working remotely, it's even more important to stay connected with coworkers. You know, whether that's an email or a text, asking people how they're doing, having more patience with ourselves and each other, addressing the new and constantly changing shared challenges and obstacles. So again, really looking at, you know, what are my limitations right now, given I might have, you know, children at home that I'm supposed to be homeschooling. I'm trying to get connected to my clients in different ways than what we're used to. And I'm also experiencing a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety. So redefining those expectations for ourselves and for those around us, and resisting, again, rescuing clients and also our colleagues, maintaining and passing along hope, showing up for clients as best as we can, finding ways to manage the uncertainty, balancing providing support while also needing support ourselves, and dealing with uncomfortable feelings like fear, anger, and frustration. So next slide, please. So that's it for this part of my presentation. And as Eve included her doggy, this is my cat who's providing me emotional support during this time as well. But again, just to reiterate those messages of, you know, we really need to take care of ourselves and each other in order to be able to take care of what our clients need from us. And also to know that we're part of a larger network here throughout LA County. And as Eve mentioned, to call on each other for supports. We're here. Well, if we can't answer your question or help you, we can help connect you to somebody who can. So again, thank you all for being here and taking the time to get this information. And again, thank you for everything you do day to day.
Thank you, Nicole. That was excellent. Appreciate that a lot. We did have a question come up in the chat, which Eve did a great job addressing, but I wanted to bring it up to you too in case you had thoughts on it. So Fatima asked us, she mentioned that the hospital liaisons are not really able to screen the clients alone usually, and a partner is oftentimes in the room with them. So do you have any suggestions from about how you could ask some of these questions or address this issue if the partner's in the room or if the client isn't able to be by themselves?
So what we've typically done is we use, and I can send this information to you, Martha, to pass along to people. We use a universal education approach that comes from Futures Without Violence. And part of what that does, and on their website, I bring this up because on their website, they have some different video clips that have different scenarios of, you know, a partner who doesn't want to leave the side of the person you're trying to interview, or even if it's a parent that doesn't want to leave the side of a minor, how to do that in a way to separate out so you can at least get a couple of minutes. And one of the main things they fall back on is saying it's a policy that we have to have at least a couple of minutes to discuss health issues one-on-one. And that, you know, we'd be more than happy to bring you back in after the conversation. The other thing is that part of that universal education is giving out what they call them safety cards, but basically it's some general information. And it talks about, you know, how relationships can impact your health. There's also a great one about healthy moms, healthy babies that would be good for this audience. And so that you can give something to them that it's not necessarily saying, you know, is this domestic violence, but it has the resources that they can turn to. So that could be another option. But I, you know, I can hear what a struggle it is when you can't separate out from the partner. And so I think if that's absolutely the case where the partner does not want, or what refuses to leave, and even saying it's a policy, they won't, you don't want to do anything that would put the client in jeopardy. So unfortunately, at that point, I don't think you'd be able to ask. I'm not sure, Eve, if you have other suggestions.
What I wrote was, you can make some general statements. These are really stressful times. It's particularly stressful for your baby. We really all have to be mindful of where our emotions are going. And sometimes, you need to talk to someone. You can make more general comments and in a way, even talk to the person who's being abusive to say, look, everybody's, in a weird place now and maybe having feelings that they haven't had before, not being able to control their feelings. And sometimes that's enough. Like, it's important, I think, like Nicole said, which is, you talk to people all the time who have all sorts of issues, and you can't fix all the issues. So all you can do at a given moment is do the best you can do. And so in that situation, if that abusive person is not leaving that person's side, just speak generally. See if there's any way, you can, sometimes you can slip things to people or whatever, a phone number or whatever. You could say, look, just so you know, there's hotlines, there are crisis hotlines, there's DMH hotlines. There are people around 24/7 if you feel like talking to someone. You don't necessarily have to give them the DV hotline number. You could give them the DMH hotline number, or you could give them something else so people just have a connection and a way in. And it may actually help, maybe, depending on who the abuser is or who the person doing harm is, they may or may not be listening to that as well.
Thank you. Those are great answers and I think very helpful. Any further questions that anybody has for Eve and for Nicole? You can feel free to just place those in the chat so that we can read them. I will mention while we're waiting for those, for more questions to come in, that I did send the slides out and the handouts this morning. If you did not receive them, you can feel free to email me and let me know. Steve also, thank you, Steve, posted a link to the webinars that we do. We have 3 of these every quarter, and this recording, as well as all the handouts and the slides, will be found on the Stronger Families blog. So there's a link in the chat for that as well. So multiple ways we can get these slides to you, because Nicole and Eve did a great job of putting them together and getting all the resources together for us. So please feel free to access them in any of those ways and then email me if you didn't get them. I'll give it a minute or 2 more to get a few more questions to come in. Oh, thank you, Nicole. Just typing in the futures about violence.
And just also to say, like Eve mentioned with the brochures, we do have copies of these safety cards available through Office of Women's Health once we can get back into our offices. So if that's something you feel might be helpful, feel free to reach out.
That's great, thank you. Okay, if there are no more questions, Nicole and Eve did leave their contact information, so please reach out to me if you have, if something comes up in the meantime that you forgot to mention or would like to ask. But again, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Eve, for being here and presenting this to us. This is so helpful and really important. We've had a lot of questions about this. It's come up a lot in the recent months, and so it's really great to get this concise information from you and have a point of contact that we can then know where to find information like this in the future. So this is so appreciated. We're really, really thankful to have you here today.
We're thankful also, really, I mean, for all of your work, and really, we're all in this together. So we really want to keep this connection going. So we'll work on that as well.
And just to add too, I think it would be helpful if, if there are things that you feel like within your visitation and your work with your clients that come up that need to be different things that either the Department of Public Health or the DV Council or the field in general needs to look further into to develop more tools for, we're always open to having discussions about that as well. Because again, you guys are on the front line, you are experiencing things in real time, and knowing what's working and what's not would be really helpful for us as well.
Right, and that's true with regards to DCFS also. Like I said, I'm working with this on about 3 different fronts. So if you keep me posted on the issues, it's really helpful.
That's great to know. Thank you. We will make sure that everybody's aware of that too. But it's nice to have a partnership, to have this back and forth with you. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Just for everybody on the webinar, I am going to send out an evaluation link. So please be looking in your email for that. I'll send it to everybody who registered. The evaluations are helpful for us so we know how to structure these and make them more helpful for you in the future. And then also if there's any specific suggestions or things, further information you're looking for, that's a great place for us to get that information from you so that we can support you in the future too. So I don't see any more questions coming in. I just see a lot of thank you. So once again, thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you, Eve. This has been great and very helpful. And I'm sure if everybody was unmuted, you could hear them clapping right now. So thank you very much, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Everybody
Bye-bye.
participating. Yep. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks so much.